Um, Omari, firstly, welcome to the very first edition of BrainWave Live. I'm your host, Ryan Tosh, Neurotech recruiter here at Established Search. And in our first edition of BrainWave Live, we're joined by CEO of Resonant Link Medical, Omari Bouknight. Omari, thank you very much for being our first guest. And yeah, pleasure to have you on the first edition.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, before we get into things in terms of Resonant Link Medical, I think that our audience would be very keen to understand a little bit more about what first drew you into the field. Maybe over a view in terms of medtech, but what drew you in? What was the main motivator for Omari Bouknight coming into the medtech space?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thanks again for the invitation. And I really do believe that the medical technology, or the medtech industry as we call it, is having a tremendous impact around the world, and privileged to be part of it. My story and entry into medtech really goes back to my younger years. I was raised by two physician parents and had the opportunity every day to hear them come home with their stories of caring for others. And I was really drawn to the field of healthcare very early on, but I also realized that my path of impact wouldn't be through the traditional way of becoming a physician like the two of them.
For sure.
So it took a little while to find out exactly where my role would be, but coming out of a university with a background in supply chain and operations, I really enjoyed technology. I really enjoyed products that you could touch and feel and that could have a mechanism of action. And this was really in the very early 2000s, where there was a lot of innovation and excitement happening in cardiology in particular.
For sure.
Cardiology with the advent of stents, and also in electrophysiology with the advent of cardiac pacemakers and ICDs and biventricular pacemakers. There was a lot of innovation going on. And as I discovered this field of innovation, I felt that it was really my calling and sweet spot to be part of medtech. So I got involved in medtech in the early 2000s, and it's just been an incredible ride since then.
Brilliant. It sounds fantastic. I didn't know about your background in terms of your family being physicians. Out of interest, what field did they study? Where are they still practicing today?
Both of my parents are now, I'll say, semi out of practice. My dad's in semi-retirement, but he was a professor, taught at Michigan State University for decades, and was an associate dean at the school, and really had a passion for teaching others. I think that was an area that he enjoyed and also excelled at. His focus was in interventional medicine, internal medicine, and with that focus had really a broad base that he was focused on. My mother, similar background, also focused on internal medicine, but she also was interested in non-for-profit work, and so she pivoted out of medicine, I would say, 2/3 of the way through her career, and then focused on not-for-profit work, still focusing on health, but I think in a more broader sense than what you would typically think from a physician.
Brilliant. That's really good to hear that journey has stemmed from your parents. That's really nice to hear. And talking about maybe you now and the personal journey that you've been on. In terms of what was the moment that you knew that you wanted to step into the CE role? I'm not too sure if maybe our audience members are aware about how you stepped into the CEO role at Resonant Link Medical. We might have had a little part to play in that. But what surprised you most once you got there, specifically at Resonant Link Medical? Because before you were working at large multinational organizations, you were working with the likes of the Abbott, one of the big four within the cardiology space. But what was the moment that you knew that you wanted to step into the CEO role?
Yes, it's funny when you get interested in opportunities, a lot of times it's a reflection or a connection to something you were involved with in your past. And so while I have had the privilege of working for large organizations, I've also worked at some smaller startups as well. So my background's been a little bit of a blend of both. And in one of my experiences, my earlier experiences, I was working with a small company, or it was relatively small at the time, called Neurotech. Obviously, it grew quite a bit over the years and eventually ended in the hands of Abbott. But as part of that experience, I had the opportunity to work on left ventricular assist devices, which are treating the most advanced forms of heart failure. In many cases, they serve as a bridge for patients to reach transplant, or for those patients that are not transplant eligible, they could receive an LVAD for the duration of their lives. So these are very critical patients in critical need, and LVADs serve a tremendous role in terms of helping to address their symptoms, but also helping them to live longer lives. One of the biggest questions that LVAD patients always would be about lifestyle. LVADs by nature are power-hungry devices. They require a lot of power in order for them to operate. And so they actually contain a lead or a drive line that is tunneled through the abdomen and out to a controller into batteries, which help run and power the system. And that can be a significant consideration for these patients in terms of their lifestyle. And so the industry had been interested from a very early phase in seeing if there was a way that they could directly power an LVAD through the skin, such that a driveline would not be required and a patient could live a much more normal life. And I think those elements of quality of life are a big part of what drives a patient to want to receive a technology. So we looked into it even in that early phase, but there really just wasn't the right type of technology out there that would allow for this to happen. So when the Resonant Link Medical opportunity passed my desk, the first thing that I thought about was 20 years back working on what we call a fully implantable LVAD system. And the fact that this technology really holds the promise to make that become reality. So that was the first piece that made me very excited and attracted and interested in the technology and what they had.
Brilliant. It's almost a throwback in some sense. But you're going back to those 20 years ago when you thought, we were waiting for this type of innovation. We were waiting for this type of disruption. And now it's here in front of me and it's caught up. And that's really exciting. Now, talking about, of course, your leadership style, that would have evolved in the organizations that you've specifically joined, the big multinationals, the startup type organizations. You've been in that role now as a CEO at Resonant Link Medical for coming up to a year. Yeah. I presume that your leadership style has changed from people that you've managed, but of course, Resonant Link Medical isn't an Abbott. Of course, that isn't the case at this moment in time. That is hopefully the long-term aspect. But your leadership style, how has that evolved throughout your journey so far?
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate because I've been in multiple operating roles in different size companies working on different technologies and truly around the world. So I've had the opportunity to serve in a global capacity. And so that's given me a lot of experiences that I think I've been able to walk into the door at Resonant Link Medical with. From a leadership perspective, my leadership philosophy really revolves around two questions. Number one, what value can I bring to the organization? What can I deliver that can really help the organization accelerate and to develop to be the organization that it ultimately could have the most impact in the world, honestly. And then the second one is, how do I help to unlock the capabilities and skills of the team members that are already? So in other words, what can I do that maybe no one else in the organization can do? And then what can I do to help others with the roles and skills and capabilities that they have that maybe no one else in the organization has? And Resonant Link Medical, I think, is a very interesting kind of case study as it applies to that, because it was pretty clear where my talents would apply to the company and then the areas where maybe I could help to lift and support others. So my focus has really been on understanding what our applications could be, and having served in operating roles in big and small organizations, being able to understand what are the applications of our technology that they could really unlock as we enable others. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're really doing, is we're enabling smaller, smarter, longer lasting devices. And so understanding those applications from a clinical standpoint, understanding those applications from a patient standpoint are very important. And so that's been a big part of where I've been trying to lead and where I've been focusing my attention, as well as then helping the team members really execute at their highest level. So that's the second aspect of leadership where I've really been focused. And we have an extraordinarily talented team, able to really do things that other organizations have not been able to, and at the highest level. So being able to allow them, enable them to operate at the highest level is a critical aspect of what I need to do as a leader.
The people that I've spoken to so far internally at Resonant Medical have been nothing short but fantastic. There's different characters in there, high energy, and people that you want to work around every single day. And that's really nice that you are there empowering them, but of course supporting them to do the best that they can as well. And that's a place that people want to work for. So you've already touched on it very briefly when we're talking about Resonant Link Medical and, of course, the throwback 20 years ago to what you needed in the industry. But tell us more about what it is that Resonant Link Medical is currently building at the moment. What is it that maybe is the goal over the course of the next few years, but what is it specifically that you've been tasked in building?
Yeah, and this has been a very different type of organization for me to be involved in versus what I was doing previously. So in my previous operating roles, I was working on either a single product or a suite of products that were being targeted to be used by physicians and clinicians and applied to a certain patient set. At Resonant Link Medical, what we've really done is developed a suite of technologies and a suite of tools that are enablers. They're enabling this next generation of intelligent implants, as we will call it. The interesting about the technology that we've developed is that it's highly scalable. So essentially what we've created is a new way of transferring wireless power with its ability to go across the skin. So the implication there is obviously for implantable technologies. It has the ability to power devices that either have batteries, so to have very efficient, rapid, and safe temperature or energy transfer into those devices, but also can power devices directly. So the technology is so efficient and has the capability to run devices directly through energy transfer. So it's an enabling platform. But the exciting part of the technology, we call it Orion, is that Orion has the ability to be scaled. So we work on very small miniaturized implants all the way up to LVADs and all the way up the kind of the energy chain, if you will. And so that's been really exciting to work on something that could have such an impact. Truly has implications really for almost any active implantable.
Definitely. I think one of the most exciting things about, and you mentioned it there, is that it's not just for cardiology. It's not just for neurotech. These are for active implantable devices, but they can be used across the board. We're seeing a number of different organizations stepping into new therapeutic areas, but the technology still very much remains the same, still needing that rechargeable aspect. So when we talk about neurostimulation for sleep apnea, when we talk about overactive bladder, the technology remains the same. It's a very similar technology between sleep apnea neurostimulation devices and to pacemakers within obviously large multinational organizations. So the fact that you've got that breadth of opportunity to not silo yourself into one therapeutic area is really enticing. It's really attractive for a lot of individuals. Now, looking in terms of the company vision, you'll have long-term goals as CEOs. The private equity VCs, they'll always say, Omari, what's the goal? What's the long-term ambition? As a CEO, how do you personally define success for the company beyond revenue and growth? Of course, revenue is great, but how do you define success beyond that revenue and growth for Resonant Link Medical?
Yeah, and my mindset has always been what is the impact that we can have on patient lives. So we talk a lot about how many patients can we impact through our technologies. And so we have a goal to get to 500,000 patients over the next several years in terms of the impact of our technology. And that's something that we track very carefully. We have a very strong focus on that and what the benefits are to the patient. So while we're a part of the system, we're not the entire system, we're very much aware that it's a very important part getting back to patient lifestyle and quality of life. We're in the business of trying to make the technology as forgettable and intuitive as possible so that patients can get back to the lifestyles that they appreciate and that they enjoy. So we really focus on that patient impact, and that's a key part of our long-term goals.
That's brilliant. A patient-orientated organization is what people want to hear, but at the same time, it's what the reason why I'm in medtech. It's a reason why the majority of the individuals that are working upstairs here at the Established Search team are part of the medtech team as well. And the fact that Resonant Link Medical is that type of organization as well speaks volume. Of course, you are a business, but at the same time, it's patient-orientated success. That's what you deem as a successful launch, a successful focus for the team too. Now, looking at innovation, risk, and regulation. Regulation comes with all types of medtech. You've been through probably various different types of organizations where regulation comes first. There's always risk, there's always innovation. How do you balance bold innovation with clinical evidence, regulation, and patient safety? I think that's important, following on from, of course, making sure that patient success is there at the same time too.
For sure, absolutely. And when we're talking about implantable medical devices, oftentimes these fall into class 3 category, which is considered to be the most kind of sophisticated and also have the highest level of regulatory burden. So ensuring safety and safety profile in these types of technologies is critical. When you're dealing with class 3 devices, the requirement typically is some form of pivotal trial, at least in the US, but also widely accepted in Europe and in other geographies. And that often requires randomized clinical trials with evidence that can go out for a couple of years. So it's a very high burden, but I think appropriately so from the standpoint that you really want to make sure the clinical evidence is there to support and justify the usage of the technology. I think one of the shifts that we're seeing is that originally when we talked about implantable medical devices, the focus was, can you show a mortality benefit? Can you show a survival benefit? Meaning, with this device, with this technology, will patients live longer? I think what we're starting to see is a shift that, yes, of course, that is a goal and an important one, but also now focusing on, can we improve quality of life in these patients? Can implantable devices improve quality of life? And when you have that as a goal, even a primary goal, then I think the burden even increases higher to say that the safety of the device and the risk profile of the device must be at a very high level, such that you're improving quality of life across the board without patients having to incur additional safety risks. And that's where I think these randomized clinical trials are very important. And I also think it's where having technologies such as ours that could provide better use cases, provide better ease of use, and provide more intuitive usage for patients is also important.
You've almost answered the second question that I had for you there, Omari, where the risks that you knowingly take on that were critical to where the company is today. You want to, of course, make sure that patient success is there. You want to make sure that it's not just a focus on mortality rates, but which is important, but you want to make sure, of course, that those risks are avoided as much as possible. But what risks did you knowingly take on earlier that were critical to where the company is today? Of course, you've been there for a year. There's maybe some things that you don't know might happen in the future. There's probably regulation. There's more innovation that's just around the corner. But what is it that you knowingly took on from an early perspective of Resonant Link?
Yeah, and I think that we serve in the role as a partner. So I think that the partnerships that we develop are always something that we take a close look at. We want to be partnered with companies that have a similar ethos as we do in terms of patient focus. But at the end of the day, the companies are the ones that carry the water in terms of getting through the regulatory process. So the risks that we look at and evaluate day to day have to do more with the base and underlying technology and prioritizing and determining where we deploy our resources. So we're not a massive conglomerate with resources that are unending. So prioritizing how we develop the technology and then also prioritizing what partnerships we put into play are probably the biggest types of conversations that we have that relate back to some levels of risk. But I think by having a really thoughtful roadmap and then also being very close to the market and where the market's going, that allows us to assess those risks pretty well.
Brilliant. And bringing this back now to focusing more on team, culture, environment. You're clearly a very strong leader from where you've been during your time at Abbott, these large multinationals, these startups. But I can also advocate there's some key individuals that I think quite highly of within your team at Resonant Link Medical. I'll give a quick shout out to Rachel, who I think is fantastic. But what qualities do you prioritize when building out your leadership team? Is it the Rachels of the Resonant Link Medical, the individuals that are fascinated about the technology, that are patient first? What qualities do you prioritize when building out leadership teams?
Yes, Rachel's incredible, and we have an incredible team. It really is an incredible team, and part of what we look for is very high IQ, but also very high EQ. I think that sometimes we fall in love with a CV or resume or a background that seems to be a perfect fit,
Sure.
and that makes us sometimes overlook some cultural elements that might make teamwork more challenging. Because the programs and projects we're working on are very complex, oftentimes it requires extreme levels of collaboration. And we always talk about internally collaboration over competition. And so we try to cheer each other on, and we try to celebrate each other's successes, and we try to ensure that each success is really a team success. And I think that is something that was a cultural element before I showed up, and certainly is a cultural element that I've encouraged and tried to develop. But I think when people talk to me about Resonant Link Medical and what we do, the technology that we've developed is absolutely amazing, but I always talk about the team first, because I think at the end of the day, that's really what allows us to succeed. And we do have a very nice kind of cultural situation that we developed, and a lot of that is because we have team members that are very high IQ, but also very high EQ, and we're also very much mission focused and mission driven.
Sure. High IQ, high EQ, but also highly competitive. I did see on LinkedIn that you went out to play pickleball a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, it's good to see that you've got that camaraderie. You've got almost that we're in this together type of relationship with your team as well. And that speaks volume, because sometimes those companies miss those personal touches where the CEO is being competitive, that you can have a good joke with them, but also you're building something which is together at the same time too. Now, in terms of your values, cultural values that you protect fiercely within the company as it does look to grow, what's the one aspect of Resonant Link and the culture within the business that you are keen to keep very much the same as that business looks to grow even further?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a couple. One is we take our work very seriously, because it's important and serious work that we do, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. So we do like to keep a light attitude. I mean, none of us are professional pickleball players, but we all enjoy getting out on the court and having a good time. So we take our work very seriously. We never take ourselves too seriously, and I think that allows us to engage with a lightness. But we're also very much focused on being predictable and being able to deliver on our promises with our customers. So that is something that, as we grow, we're focused on today, and we want to continue to have focus on. We have very clear quarterly goals that we pursue. They're ambitious, and because they're ambitious, it doesn't mean that, out of 10 goals, we hit every 10 every quarter, but we want to get very close, and when we fall a little bit short, we want to understand why. So we take our performance very seriously as well.
Brilliant. Good to hear. Now, as maybe the audience might be aware, or as maybe, of course, some of the readers of the newsletter might be aware, I'm a neurotech recruiter. Industry perspective, what Resonant Link Medical are building is very broad across the medtech market, and that's the reason why we wanted to obviously jump on a call with you today, Omari, to learn a little bit more about the broader perspective of Resonant Link Medical. But from your seat as CEO, what excites you most specifically about the neurotech market? And just to do maybe a quick plug as to the YouTube series that you've been building, you've had quite a few neurotech CEOs or senior leaders for your YouTube channel too. But what is it that excites you most about that industry in particular?
Yeah, I'm very excited about neurotech, and obviously my role initially came from cardiology, but I think a lot of the things that we've learned in cardiology and the applications of cardiology are being applied to neurotech, but we're seeing a pace of innovation and a pace of investment in neurotech at levels that we've never seen before. And obviously part of that is the fascination and interest in brain-computer interfaces that's driving some of it, but it's not driving all of it. I think that advances in neuromodulation are continuing very quickly. We're seeing applications of neuromodulation that aren't just focused on pain, but are focused on other elements. You mentioned a couple of them, sleep apnea being one. We've recently seen a very nice investment in a technology that's targeting asthma. We've seen neuromodulation starting to be more targeted, things like PNS, peripheral nerve stimulation for pain. And then we're also seeing things like focus on for different forms of incontinence. So the applications of neuromodulation, I think, are expanding very rapidly. And a lot of this has to do with the trend that I mentioned earlier about focusing now on quality of life elements in medical treatment and not just survival benefit. And then there's the whole field of brain-computer interface, which is absolutely exploded.
For sure.
So I am incredibly excited about neurotech. I think in particular, there's a couple of aspects that people are really pursuing, which are very interesting, and they're sort of intimately related. So one has to do with more individualized treatment. We all know that we're all different. When we first came out with electrical stimulation, it was at a certain pulse width at a certain time in a certain way. And now we're seeing a variety of algorithms that are allowing for more individualized treatment. And that really ties into the concept of closed loop algorithms, which essentially now are starting to leverage artificial intelligence at new levels and really allowing us for us to have individualized treatment. And of course, that requires a lot of power and a lot of energy, which is why I think the concept around wireless power, wireless charging is a topic that's really being pushed to the forefront. At the same time, people want to miniaturize their devices and they want to be targeted in their therapies, and that requires either rechargeable or focused energy. So all of these aspects are really intertwined in a very interesting way, but neurotech is exploding at new levels, and that's very exciting for us and certainly for you as well.
We could talk all day about the BCI market. We could talk obviously continuously about all the different therapeutic areas that the neurostimulation space is bringing up in the industry. Every day I come across a new therapeutic, a new clinical study, a new publication, and that's what's enticing. But also not just enticing for the neurotech enthusiasts like us, but also for the patients as well, to see that there's opportunity, to see, okay, this is maybe a solution later down the line. And for that to be an opportunity for Resonant Link Medical to say, let's have this consideration for, of course, what we're building at this moment in time too, is really exciting for you guys. Looking in terms of, you touched on it very briefly there about intersecting artificial intelligence. We're looking into data, personalized medicine. How is it and how do you see neurotech intersecting with those new digital continuous solutions of artificial intelligence in the space? Is there anything that maybe that you've seen that is particularly quite exciting within that market?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's happening. I think that people are identifying biomarkers that can be used in their closed loop algorithms. I think that for those that are focused on that space in that area, clinical trial will show that your device is efficacious and safe, but maybe you have 300 to 500 patients in that clinical trial. So I think what we'll see is that design of post-market studies to make these algorithms more intelligent. There'll be a greater weight placed on those than ever before, because a few hundred patients is helpful, but tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, I think is really what allows you to dial in those algorithms. So being able to have mechanisms to collect and really triage and assess data is going to be more and more important. And I think that what all that means really is, from a medtech perspective, we have to bring in new expertise, new technology expertise more than ever before. In terms of closed loop and in technologies that really were on the forefront of it, NeuroPace obviously comes to mind in the epilepsy sector, which really kind of introduced the first truly closed loop epilepsy device, fully implantable in the space. And I think what we've seen from them is that by able to aggregate data over time, that they're able to dial in a more precise algorithms for patient treatment. So I think that's a tremendous example. And then obviously there's been a lot of work kind of now that's starting to get into clinical study that is looking to capitalize on those types of concepts and ideas.
Sure. But when, of course, cloud data are, of course, looking into maybe more digital solutions integrating into the neurotech market, the first that I think of is also patients being able to access that data and seeing the performance of those devices. How well is my neurostimulator acting for chronic pain, for sleep apnea, for asthma, all of these important things that are used every single day. We're actively being able to use our phone to track our sleep, our performance, our fitness, going to the gym, of course. But at the same time, we should allow patients to have access specifically to how is their neurostimulator, how is their Neurotech device impacting their life. And that feedbacking directly to physicians, I think, is really exciting too. And in turn, feeding back to the medtech market so they can have that continuous improvement to make sure that new iteration or new product is the next best thing. That's really exciting for me to see firsthand too. I think the best example that I could give in this instance would be the Inspire Medical Systems device. It's considerably smaller, but at the same time, it's integrating more digital solutions. And that's really exciting for patients and also for physicians too that are implanting it. When, of course, from your side, you're an industry leader. You've spoken at numerous events and you're now obviously the CEO of Resonant Link Medical, but as maybe one of the individuals at the top at the moment, what do you think the industry needs less of and potentially more of right now when it comes to the neurotech market?
Yeah, I think in terms of what the industry needs more of is really bringing in some of the pure tech concepts and making sure that tech is starting to garner a seat at the table. I think because of the interest that we're garnering in neurotech, that we're seeing a lot more interest from investors outside of the traditional medtech sphere. And I think that is having certain impacts and has certain implications that we need to better understand, things such as valuation, for example. But beyond that, I think it's a very good thing for us, and we need more tech mindset and at least some more tech advisors around the medtech table as we consider some of these newer applications within neurotech. So that's something I think we definitely could use more of, and I think it's something that we're going to see more of, and I think overall it'll be healthy for our medtech industry. I think the other thing that would be helpful and that we're starting to see, which is interesting, is more opportunities for capital infusion. So, historically it's been, if you're running a medtech company and you're looking at a strategic exit, the only potential exit really has been acquisition. And so that has been somewhat limiting. I think that's also been limiting in terms of the investments we've seen coming into the space. We're now starting to see some companies get more aggressive about pursuing public offerings earlier on and finding other avenues for investment. So I think that having more second rail opportunities, other opportunities that are exits, will also be healthy for the industry. And if those exist, then I think we'll see even additional interest in investing in the space. So I think those are a couple of areas that would love to see more of. In terms of less, it's hard to put your finger on one thing, but I know that I wake up every morning and I look at the potential number of conferences that I could attend, and it's exploding. So sure. I don't know exactly how to manage that, but I'd love to maybe have a couple less conferences that I need to attend.
Maybe the next pitch, Omari, is that we need to have a BrainWave conference. That might be the next thing where we just get all of the neurotech market together in just one place. That would be great. So
right.
Yeah, I'll have a conversation with our leadership team and see if that's in the pipeline for sure. But yeah, really good to gain your insight. From obviously my side, we really appreciate you jumping on the first edition of BrainWave Live. From my side, of course, please go and check out Resonant Link Medical. What we will do is we'll add a quick link to the website. We'll also, of course, add a quick link to Omari's LinkedIn profile too. And before you go, Omari, one final question that I have for maybe our next guest. Is there a question that you have for the next CEO, the next senior leader of the BrainWave Live? Is there anything that comes to mind that you would like to ask our next guest?
Oh, that's a really good one. I think that I'd love for you to ask your next guest just to give a little bit of a flavor of what their past week has looked like.
Okay, that sounds like a good plan for sure. Well, look, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining the first edition, and yeah, we'll speak soon.
Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.